Good morning, everybody. This is the Community and Economic Development Committee. I am John Weddleton.
Dick Training.
Pete Peterson. Dean Gates, City Council. What?
Gary Teagle.
Hi, Jana Walton.
Ryan Yell, Planning Department.
Hudson Marlovitz, Miss Clerk's Office.
Forrest Dunbar.
Amy Nabowski.
Let's go ahead and start there.
Jeff Peters.
Russ Kumar.
Sue Nolan.
Mark Kirkland.
Tim Mitchell.
Michelle Gallagher.
Dave Whitfield, Planning.
Quincy Armstrong, Legal. Michelle McNulty, Planning.
Colleen Peterson and Jamie for the interview.
All right, thanks. So, this agenda got convoluted because of me. And there was confusion that probably mostly I caused. But we had on this, we got the definition of athletic fields, which is complicated, update on the marijuana transfers, and we had on the agenda for quite a time, a number of weeks, discussion of bar break in the area of brown bag sandwiches. And at some point that was shown on the June 7th meeting, but that's because I misspoke and it got put back to this one where it was supposed to belong. But then when brown bag closed down, I said, okay, the issue was brown bag's gone, it's not an issue, was my thinking. It is not the end of the issue, though. The people in that neighborhood still have other issues that they're concerned about. So I got a couple of emails yesterday. One said, thank goodness it's done, and the other one said, no, we still have issues. So we have some people here who would like to have an opportunity to speak for at least a few minutes. And I think it'd be a benefit for me. I thought it was brown bag, but I guess there are broader issues in that neighborhood that at least they get as highlight. I don't know that we have any action, but for me it would be an education. Chris isn't here.
Are you calling in, do you know?
No, he said he's a few minutes late. So I'd like to add it back to the agenda, if only for them to speak, but perhaps wait till Chris is here, because that's his district. And so maybe we'll just move on with athletic fields, and then maybe squeeze it in before this next item or after or something. Does that work for everyone? So we'll kind of re-add that bar block or bar break 3rd Avenue block agenda item somewhere on the list. Is that okay?
Yep.
Does that work? Thank you. Anything else to add on this? Okay. So definition of athletic field. We've got something here. Who's doing this? Is Ryan?
I suppose I can give a brief summary and some background here. If members of this committee can recall the great hopscotch debate of 2016,
I'm just writing a note about that, actually.
whether or not a hopscotch by itself constituted a playground, which drove us to create a definition for playground, but also take a look at the other protected land uses in code that weren't clearly defined. And one of those was athletic field, because that isn't really mentioned in code anywhere other than the marijuana regulations. So we created this definition, a distinctly marked area of natural turf, artificial turf, sand, hardened surface, or the like, developed and maintained to be used for a sport or game, including associated spectator facilities. Examples include soccer, football, softball, and baseball fields, tennis, basketball, and volleyball courts, hockey rinks, and golf and disc golf courses, but do not include open areas occasionally or informally used for athletic purposes, lake areas that are hot mopped in the winter, or ski or dog sled trips. So, planning department was contacted probably about a month ago, whether or not a bowling alley would constitute an athletic field and meet that definition. We kind of were unclear exactly whether or not it was, because one could say it met the definition, one could say it didn't meet the definition. So we contacted our legal department, which said that it did technically meet the definition because a bowling alley is a hardened surface that's developed and maintained to be used for sport or game. Now, this gets called into question because the bowling alley has a liquor license or a
So
beer
you got
wine
a full
license.
bar license.
But athletic fields are not protected land use when it comes to alcohol. They're only for marijuana. And also, bowling alleys kind of get a look of like, well, that's something you do on a Saturday night. That's not necessarily an athletic field. But professional bowler would disagree with that. Same thing with ping pong tables. Same thing with even cornhole. There's professional cornhole players now. So we have to look at this in broad terms, and we can't necessarily look at it as just something somebody might do on a Saturday night, but exactly what it is and what the intent of the protected land use is. With that, I'll turn it over.
Okay, so yeah, I contacted Brian probably a month ago, and out of extreme caution, just to make sure I didn't miss anything. Kerry Teagle and his family own the bowling alley. They own the whole strip mall there, and they want to put a small retail marijuana store in there. And I said, looks good, but let me make sure about this bowling alley because I've seen weirder things happen in the planning department, and so I just wanted to make sure. And so. Ryan and I went back and forth, where his legal department said, this is an athletic field, and I said, this really isn't an athletic field. We went back and forth, and we just said, okay, let's just bring it to this committee and have you guys discuss it and debate it. This particular, bowling alley, I brought some handouts. I don't know if I brought enough for everybody, but it passes around. In the daytime, they offer dollar bowling to seniors, 65 and older.
55 and over.
55 and over. They have a full liquor bar. There's no arcade machines or anything like that. And it's historically been this Cosmo bowling drinking place. And nobody seems to really have even thought. They were shocked. Kerry was shocked when I said, well, maybe this is an athletic field. He's like, well, let me show you my athletes. And, and so so here we are. That's basically it. And I don't think the intent of an athletic field, when we added this as a sensitive use, we were thinking more ballparks, soccer fields, places where kids come and play, games and tournaments and not necessarily a pool hall or a ping pong center with a bar in it or a bowling alley with Cosmo bowling pretty much every night. So I'm not sure this is really what the intent was. And they've got this open suite, and Kerry really wants to develop it, and there's no retails on that side of town. I mean, I could be wrong, but I don't think there's any marijuana facilities in the Sand Lake Community District. I could be wrong, but I don't know of any. And that's my home, that's where I live. I live in that community. That's my community council. And I haven't seen any come up, but I could be wrong.
You was at the last community council meeting, and Great Northern
That's right.
presented.
Great Northern's coming with their variance, the one across the street from the church on Diamond.
That's the closest.
Yeah, that's the closest one.
Wait, just for a second, for the record, Assemblyman Consett has arrived and Chris Schutte is here. Thanks.
So that's kind of where we're at on this. I'd like to hear from the assembly members, whether or not they thought this was something that should be included in sensitive uses. Because obviously, and the door to door is more than 200 from the bowling alley to the suite at the end. It's pretty far
Bowling
away.
center is on one end of a 44,000 square foot building, and of course the retail facility is on the opposite end of this building. So,
Not that that really matters in the way that our code is written, because the 200-foot buffer is lot line to lot line. So if this is a sensitive use, we have to go for a variance. But I just can't. It doesn't sit well with me that this is a sensitive use.
Okay, just Pete.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. So this is the bowling alley that's located on Jewel Lake Road in 88th, is that correct?
Correct. Mhm.
Okay, just wanted to make sure. Thank you.
Forrest.
Thank you, Mr. Welton. So the document we have in front of us with a variety of code provisions, are those all existing code provisions, and the bolded and in some cases italicized, that's all just for our own edification, or is there anything in here that's already proposed to be added?
I need this document,
Okay.
and this is all existing code. It's just bolded, highlighted,
Okay.
that type of thing, except for this on the last page, says options. So that's possibly adding word outdoor to the definition.
So may I ask a follow-up, Mr.
Please.
Malone? Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So are we being asked right now to consider an ordinance down the road perhaps that would alter this in some way? For example, it says at the end, add outdoor to the end of this. Or are we just offering opinions for a sort of bureaucratic interpretation of code? And if that's the case, I don't know. That's sort of an odd thing for the assembly to do. Personally, I think that you should use sort of as close to the plain meaning of the athletic field as possible. And for me, it's clear that bowling alley doesn't fit in that. I'm sort of surprised that that was the legal decisions made. But again, I'm sort of curious what action we are expected to take.
Yeah, well, that's a fair question. We dealt with a somewhat similar issue once before, where someone who had an issue where, they were going to put a marijuana shop in a huge mall, but property line to property line, they were too close to protected use, and they just wanted to get a sense of the assembly. Would we grant a variance for that use? And they walked away thinking probably not, so they went and did a replat to solve their problem.
That one on Diamond.
Right. So in a sense, that is something we could do here, is kind of signal that, yeah, we think you're right. But also consider a code change, because reading what we put in code, I think the planning department's hands are tied, or offer a change. So any of those three.
Team first, maybe.
Dean?
I think, in response to Mr. Dunbar, that the Assembly, as the legislative body, they're not really able to direct the executive branch how to interpret what's in law, interpret it and apply it to an application. So our options, I think, are to change the law, change the code, if you want to fix the situation and clarify. So I think we need to take legislative action, or this committee recommend legislative action, the full body. But you can offer interpretation. You can discuss what you think it's supposed to mean. But planning doesn't have to rescind this or change the code to clearly explain or define what you think it's supposed to mean. So I think that's helpful.
Thank you.
Yeah, I just would, gently rebut that this is obviously not an athletic field. I think it's actually is an athletic field. That's a dilemma, and so we have to come up with a solution.
I'm sorry, excuse me, I couldn't.
I don't think you can argue it's not an athletic field just on its face. I mean, there are athletes. There's a whole league of people that use bowling alleys across the world to do sports. Bowl 300s, I don't get it, but to each their own. I don't think it's clear. I think it's clear the other way, and that definitely demands action if we want to let this change.
I have a few questions. First, let me ask you about in your facility. Do you have a bunch of arcades and stuff in your facility?
No.
You knew where I was going
Yeah.
to. Because that was a big discussion to see. Arcades, we were told there were no other arcades really established that were left for children. And so that was an area that people were concerned about, was arcades. So I wanted to make sure that. But absent of that particular potential, in my view, I was here the whole time. I never thought of a bowling alley as an athletic field. Like I said, there's other considerations when we were talking about, roller rinks, or we're talking about, I think, arcades. I think those, a roller rink obviously is a place designed to attract children, but I don't think they're protected either. But again, we only have a couple of them, right? So, with respect specific to athletic fields, I always envisioned it was something outdoors, and I'm actually, I'm very comfortable. Frankly, my recommendation would be, I'm happy to sponsor legislation just to change and add the word outdoor, because I think it's a simple fix to go in line with, I was in every single meeting, to go in line with what the Assembly was thinking at the time, because that was my interpretation. Pete was there too. Dick was there too.
Yeah, idea never came up about bowling alleys.
Okay. Do you have a full dispensary liquor license there?
Yes.
Okay. From my perspective, you got a bowling alley. It's not an athletic field. I've been here since the beginning. You can call it athletic field if you want, but it's not.
And there's a package store too in the same strip mall. So there's a full dispensary, liquor, bar, and then there's a package store. And so I thought, the amusement establishment definition where bowling alleys is actually referenced, that's what I thought kind of cleared it up for me. That's an amusement center, but.
John, if we're gonna treat marijuana like alcohol, we need to treat it the same way. We can have liquor then, we should be able to have this type of drug. They're both drugs.
Yeah, but one's different.
Same thing.
Thank you. Pete, did you?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So, I used to bowl in my
Is this a
younger
confession?
in my younger years, and as a matter of fact, I sponsored a team for a while. And
Drinking when you're bowling?
what's that?
Nothing.
I did start out a game one time with 8 consecutive strikes. That's the closest I ever came to 300, and I never came close to that again. So. I don't know, are we going to get down to the point where we have to come up with a definition of the word field? I mean, I think we can get pretty deep in the weeds in a hurry on this situation. And I think Dean's idea of just putting the word outdoor in there is a simple solution.
Yeah, I think.
No secret, I'm a supporter of the industry. There are other athletic fields that are indoors that we have to contemplate, though, and that's the hockey field or the dome or the AT&T Center, whatever it's called now, where they have the jumping, and then on the other side they have volleyball and basketball and
That's right.
outdoor soccer. And so while I personally lean toward, okay, I think that we have to contemplate that. It's not as simple as indoor outdoor, because all of a sudden we would change the landscape for a variety of other uses. And I would be supportive of that personally, but we need to contemplate that.
So Dean, I'm sorry.
Go ahead, we'll get Ryan.
I'm sorry. I was just going to ask on that note, because Chris is actually right. We do have indoor athletic fields that I didn't consider. I mean, Jenna, would you agree?
Oh,
that
I agree, and that's what I was going to
the
point out.
dome and all that, I didn't think about that. So how do you delineate that without using, I mean, because obviously now the word indoor outdoor isn't good enough. Can we just take and specifically address bowling alleys?
Well, hang on, let's, I think, that question was to Dave?
Anybody who can answer it.
Okay, Dave.
Well, I think just as a suggestion, the definition for athletic field already excludes certain type of uses. You might add bowling alley or any other use that you deem not an athletic field as being excluded from that definition. So that might be a suggestion in lieu of just adding the language outdoor. Because I think that there is some valid concern about adding that in.
So I'm sorry, so you'd recommend just saying this specific sport is
Billiards.
exempt?
Oh, like pool table. Okay, got it.
So, yeah, Mr. Rosen, what I'm saying is just because there's, in the definition right now, it actually excludes certain uses. You might add in bowling alley or any other use that you deem not an athletic field into the excluded.
All right, thanks. I think it's Ryan. Ryan?
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair. Just expanding on that, I guess I have a bit of a counterpoint, but I would say we should lump in amusement establishment rather than getting into specific sports, because we have a curling facility in town. Curling is an Olympic sport, so you can't argue that it's not an athletic field. I'm of the mindset that a bowling alley is an athletic field because it's a professional sport.
So the shooting range.
Regardless of the skill or talent of the athletes involved, or what their intentions were coming there that night, but they're still engaging in a game or sport, which is included in the definition. I would say let's stick to amusement establishments. However, arcades are lumped in with amusement establishments, so we also have to get rid of arcades if we went that route.
Okay,
So I have an idea that we've done in multiple times in this committee where we just created a subcommittee, and I would like to do that and maybe work on with one or two other people, and then we can sit down with the planning department and with Dean, and we can bring back a proposal to this committee. If that sounds like, because it sounds like there's a lot, this is a lot more complicated than just indoor outdoor, and I would like to just sit down. I know it's going to take a lot longer than we're really going to have to talk about this, I think. But I think there's definitely a solution I can sense a solution. But I think the most productive way may be just to form a subcommittee to deal with it.
I think that's fine.
And it's like
Go around here. We are kind of a subcommittee, though.
We'll
in a
see.
way.
Yeah, we'll see how productive this comment is. So I'm in favor of, I wasn't here when these original regulations were created. I am not, I would have pushed at the time to have a much more permissive system. I know that's not what happened for marijuana establishments, because I think we end up with a lot of these sort of contradictory outcomes where, for example, like if we have a full package store in the place where marijuana is not allowed, and we set different private industries up against each other as well, and we do it under the auspices of like protecting children, but a lot of times it doesn't really play out that way at all. And we have a full bar that to me is much more threatening to children than, in some cases, than a very tightly regulated, high security marijuana facility. But assuming that sort of horse has left the barn, I still am in favor of trying to use, whenever practical, common understandings of words like athletic field and things like outdoor. And if we're using the definition it's based on professional sports, well then, like I said, shooting ranges could be considered athletic fields. Comic shops could be considered athletic fields. I mean, look, you've got professional Magic the Gathering players that assemble there. You've got professional video game players now. I mean, you have lots of professional sports that you don't think of as traditionally being professional sports, but they are multi-billion-dollar industries now. So I just, again, I wanted to kind of like reel us back to thinking about what did we actually mean when we said athletic field, and I do think that outdoor is a part of that. It's true that we have the Dome. It's true that we have the Sullivan Arena, even, which we might put our artificial turf in, where we serve alcohol during events, and we have large concerts where we serve alcohol during events. So I didn't promise this was going to be a very productive comment. I just wanted to say I do support the solution of outdoor, and on other specific cases, maybe we can, like the Dome, for example. The Dome is useful because it's part of a church, essentially. It's right next to a church, so you're not going to have a facility right there. But I am for being as sort of grounded in common sense and also as less restrictive as possible when it comes to these kind of definitions for the industry.
All right, thank you. Chris?
Yeah, I wasn't on the body at the time the rules were set, but the intent was that they would be restrictive at first and test the waters and see how effective the operators are, and then where feasible and where realistic, make things more permissive. And so it seems like we're actually entering that phase where we can be more limber and flexible with specific uses. And I think that's really the question before us, is how do we tailor the code to be more realistic or more kind of hewing to reality.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Along those same lines, we had discussions about giving or sort of requiring the industry, since it's a new industry, to prove itself. Are these going to be responsible businessmen? And from what I've seen so far, I think they have been, and matter of fact, have been more responsible than many of the alcohol establishments that we have in this city. So, yeah, I think maybe the subcommittee might be a good idea.
And just to clarify what I was thinking in my head, I wasn't thinking like the cell tower subcommittee. I wasn't thinking like a formal, we have 50 hearings and all that kind of stuff. I was literally thinking 2 or 3 of us could get together, work with planning, and draft something, come up with a solution, and then bring it back to the committee as an AO. Because I'm thinking that's the direction we're going to have to go to give real guidance to the industry. And I think, honestly, that's going to be the most productive way, because if you put, I think, a couple of us on the committee, I think both people that are looking at it from 2 different ways will both be able to hash it out.
Okay. Dick?
Since I was here from the beginning, we did this because it was a new industry. We weren't sure how it operated. It's operated well, better than alcohol has. At least it pays its taxes, unlike alcohol. But I have no problem with Amy being in the subcommittee because she has a good perspective on dealing with this. It gives us a partner we can work with. And we're going to have this crop up. It's like Title 21. There are things that crop up we knew would happen. We just deal with So now we're dealing with bowling alleys. Big deal. We deal with it.
And I'll just say, even if you don't put me on a subcommittee, I'm still gonna draft a mayo, so.
So,
So put her on it.
so who wants to be on the subcommittee?
Huh?
Yeah, I know.
Yeah.
And then either
There you go.
Yeah.
Do we, but these would be publicly noticed?
No, it
meetings,
doesn't,
so-
no. Well, like I said, too, we don't have to create an official subcommittee. You can just tell Chris and I to work on it, and we can work on
As long
it.
as you only have 3 people showing up, it doesn't have to be noticed.
Yeah, that's why I say, with the cell tower, it was very complicated. There was a lot of community involvement, specifically because it was a big issue that had been. But with the specific ones, like I said, in my mind, I just need to sit down with the planning department and make sure, and legal, and make sure we have thought of everything. And I think that's why I think it would be valuable to have me and Chris work on it.
Who on staff? Who's with Ryan? Okay, just a couple of thoughts on this. Is one is particularly when we were talking about the separation distances. It's like, what are we trying to protect and why? Kind of what Forrest was talking about, and it was fairly wishy-washy, really. And at least in my head, and I've said it many times, is we just don't want people that'll get ticked off at each other over and bumping into each other. It's not really. So we're trying. How do you define that as the trick? So I think if you were at O'Malley Center, which has hockey and kids camps and Alaska Club, that whole area, and if you plopped a marijuana facility there, you'd have a lot of people who are antsy about it right there. They bring their kids in, they don't like it. Whether it's reasonable or not, that's the way it is. We don't want that kind of issue. So, that's really what we're looking at here. And the Dome has high school sports there. It has a lot. So that, that kind of facility would be an issue. But a bowling alley, you would think, probably not so much for most people. I mean, certainly there are some. So that was, so one, as you go forward, kind of thinking that, who gets mad about this stuff? And another thing about, the industry has done very well. I think we can really complain, but I think before we loosen up, we have to wait. Now it's new, people are relatively well funded. When people's businesses start to fail and people who aren't quite ready sneak in, that's when you run into problems. And we haven't hit that point yet because it's all fairly new, their prices are high, but when prices start dropping and it gets very competitive, there will be desperate people running stores and they're going to look for revenue anywhere they can. And I think we need at least 3 years to see who those people are. So I'm not totally ready to loosen up the people who get mad restrictions. So, but that's, which is tough guidance, but we worked through it on the separation distance, but we sure made it complicated. So anyway, so I'm game with that then. We're going to just go forward, make a committee, and you'll be.
Come back to this next one.
Well, like I
Going from the
Chris and I will work it out, but
through the fourth.
okay, I think definitely next month we can bring it back.
And just so you know, we're not on a huge time crunch because the state's still going to take 6 months to get through, and I think Carrie's comfortable enough moving forward as long as we know that we're working towards a solution. So just don't stress yourself out about it.
I won't.
So July is good.
So we'll say second meeting in July.
Okay, perfect.
When would that
And
be?
look at these calls for alcohol abuse in bowling alleys.
Second CD meeting or second assembly meeting in July?
Oh, I think it's second meeting here.
Yeah. Perfect. Well, that'll work out good.
So
And
have to-
I'm assuming, Dean, you'll help us with this? I just said, I'm assuming, Dean, you'll help us with this?
Oh, yes.
I was mumbling too. It didn't help.
Okay, neither Chris was here at the very beginning of the meeting, but we agreed to at least give the people from the Third Avenue block of downtown a chance to speak on some issues. We haven't yet. We can do that, should be fairly quick. So let's do that, and then we can go to that issue. Does that work? So let's go ahead and go to B.
Do the handout on this one?
Dean, did you?
We don't have materials.
No transfers.
Well, we don't have much on B. I have something I went through last night. Generally on this, regarding marijuana transfers, we looked at this on May 3rd, and we talked about it for about 45 minutes, and then I did nothing to move it forward. So I listened to the meeting on tape last night to figure out where the heck did we land, and I've kind of sketched it out here as best as I can discern. One thing I learned is we need to, some of us, the people on this side need to speak up loudly towards that black box, so it's easier to hear. But at the end of that, we had, Amy, were you there for that meeting?
I think so.
Okay. We had a general consensus that we would change our city rules so we would allow transfers following the state's routines, which are basically, they go through, Dean can correct me if I'm wrong, but they go through, kind of, if you transfer, you have to go through almost a whole new license routine, so all the information is almost put forward. And then, of course, go to simplify, whatever we do. And then there's also a request to do a chart. I think Mandy had drawn a chart that kind of described when a change in ownership would trigger a majority control. And even if that's not an AO, but just kind of a working policy document. And there was comments that it seemed to have consensus and understand that's the way it is. A change in controlling interest triggers a need for a new license or transfer of a license if we allow that. And a sale of the business requires the buyer to get a license, which is in current code. Is that what people recall? Are we good there?
If I recall, wasn't a lot of this coming from, like, what happens if, husband owns the license and he passes away? Is this the conversation I'm remembering?
Well, I think that's dealt with in code. If someone dies, you have time to
Okay, so maybe
get
I wasn't here for this one.
This was an issue that I think the catalyst was Jana had an issue where there's a company that has 2 licenses, I think a grow and a processor or manufacturing, and they want to sublet or subcontract. You want to describe it briefly?
Yeah, it was, Dean and I were working on this issue. It was that there was 3 LLCs, they each owned a license. They wanted to take all 3 of those LLCs and title them into like a corporate holding company. So basically it was creating a different structure, but technically that's a full transfer of ownership. Does that make sense? So the parent company and subsidiaries coming in underneath the parent company. Right now, it's all just one LLC owns this, one LLC owns this, one LLC owns this, and there's no umbrella kind of taking them all into one ownership.
Okay.
And Dean actually helped me understand that we could do it under the regs as it's currently written, but I kind of felt like it was almost like a loophole through our regs without really just saying in the regs, hey, this is allowed. I said it wasn't allowed, but there's other ways to get it done.
Okay, I didn't recall that scenario. But there was also one where they were subcontracting too, wasn't there? I thought that was part of it, where someone's got 2 licenses, they wanted to subcontract some of their processing. Did I totally miss this?
I don't recall that. Do you recall that?
It's into different things than we do.
I don't recall.
Okay, well, we'll ignore that point then. We'll go with what you just said.
I think you mean, Mr. Wellington, that there was the LLC license and some level of LLC ownership.
Oh, that's possible. Forrest?
I remember from that discussion, us talking about LLCs and corporations, LLCs in particular, where the LLC owns the license, and is that right? The LLC owns the license, and then the ownership of the LLC changes. And what time does that? Because the ownership of the ownership of the license actually has not changed, right? But the only LLC has changed. So at what point does that trigger? Is that well established in state law?
It's set up in state law and code, transfer control interest. So the LLC is licensed in law, for example, 2 owners, one with 60%, one with 40% 60%, sells their interest in that LLC. That's the control interest transfer.
But that also means I'm sorry to interrupt. So that also means that you could sell that 40% interest without, you could sell a 49% interest without triggering transfer.
You still have to report it. It's a different type of transfer. It's a regular transfer versus a controlling interest transfer.
Which is all pretty simple, unless you have an LLC with 10 people, each have 10%, and one by one, they sell their 10%. Who's in control? No one really has control. And if each one sold their 10% over time, you have a whole new 10 people.
So how that's dealt with how the state does it is when one sells it, that's actually a controlling interest change, because then a new owner can come in and change the way that the direction of the LLC. So they have a very strict interpretation, and Erica came up with this very strict interpretation of what is a controlling interest, and it's more strict than you would think it would be. So, for example, I had 3 owners that owned 75%. Those owners weren't changing. the 25% owners were changing. There's like 13 of them that make up this 25%. Just a change in those 3 of those ownerships over here triggered a controlling interest change, because it changes the identity of the people that could sway the LLC, and so we had to go through the whole controlling interest change.
So if anyone has less than 50%, anyone else selling becomes a change in controlling interest. Or if anyone has less than 51%.
If anybody has less than 51%, then it just depends how it's set up. So if it's 10 owners with 10% and you sell 20% to 2 new owners, that's a controlling interest change, because it can change under Director McConnell's interpretation, which the board approved. And so we could get that for you, and I could send it to the committee from the director. That's how the state is interpreting it. It's very strict.
Do you find that the state is more clear than what we've got going on?
Yeah. Yes. Because in your code it says in some provisions you cannot transfer, but for these little limited exceptions. And so it just doesn't say what I think you mean.
Right. I think we all agreed it was confusing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, total agreement on that. Yeah.
I'd like to see what Erica has given the board.
Yeah.
If the board adopted what Erica gave, I'd like to see what Erica has given.
Okay. I'll get it for you.
Pete?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I thought that we were talking about subleasing part of a facility.
So that's a different issue. That's a shared space issue. So, these companies come in and they take like a 15,000 square foot warehouse, right? But then they have a retail corporation and then 2 LLCs that own the production for concentrates and the grow. Well, there might be a master company that's above that master leases it and then subleases it to those different entities for purposes of tax strategy, because remember, we can't deduct our regular business expenses except for the cost of goods sold. So I don't think that's an ownership issue, but I definitely think it's an issue that the state's still wrestling with as well.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Dean?
I was going to add on to what Ms. Wilson said, that we created exceptions. It seems to me from how this works, the exceptions sort of swallow the rule, and swallow the purpose of the rule, not the transfers of the licenses. And I just wanted to clarify that the difference between transfer of controlling interest and a non-controlling interest is just that they all, I guess, require the natural individuals to meet qualifications to own any interest in the license. Non-controlling interests have to be reported. That's it. Transfer controlling interest comes through and gets assembly approval. So that's the difference.
Right, okay. You want to be on a subcommittee?
Well, this one, I clearly missed this
Okay.
meeting, because this is not what I thought it was, so.
Well, so my understanding is we'd agreed at the last meeting, we can do what we want now, is that Dean would try to bring us closer to the clarity of the state. And we had confusion where we talked about the license. We had quite a bit of discussion, and the license goes both with a property and a business, not with people so much. Whereas we have a lot of phrasing that an individual owns the license, but it's really the license is attached to the business and and it can't leave that property. So kind of clarify that. And we had a couple examples that day. One I'd mocked up, but then one I think Dean and one Mandy had. And Mandy had gotten in there and cleared some of that wording up. So we had some headway there. We just need to, I think, bring in the state element and separate it so that we're not using these phrases in a conflicting way. Who owns it? The license goes with the business and the property. And I think Chris Schutte made that point pretty clearly. And not with the people so much.
But John, if he's going to do that, then we need to get a copy of what Erica's philosophy has gone on the board and they've adopted it. Because if you're going to do that, Dean, you've got to see what Erica has worked on the state.
I have a question. So what I'm hearing, this seems to be, what I'm hearing you say, it seems in my mind to be a major policy shift, because we had talked extensively about the special land use permit stays with the land. But the license, we weren't going to get into this whole the taxi cabs where you could sell this license, that license. So I'm licenses though, I guess for a like for alcohol can go to different places, but I guess I'm trying to understand what you mean. Are you meaning that you want to make licenses transferable now, or are we just talking about? I'm kind of confused.
No, you're not. You're actually spot on.
Okay.
No, so the idea was, yes, make them transferable. And the problem, the issues when these rules were written is we did not want to create a secondary market.
That's
for
right.
them.
That was the biggest issue.
And we wanted control of it. So none of this would take away our control over that license. And the secondary market issue we discussed quite a bit. And one was, since it ties with a piece of property, it's really hard to buy and sell it. You got to basically buy the business. So it's the business that has the value. And if it's a failing business, that license has little value. If it's booming, then the license has value. And we don't limit the number of licenses. So there's really, you're not making a secondary market. So those two, having control of the license and not creating a secondary market, we're taken care of. So then, and that leads us to question, then why no transfers? It just makes it complicated for the business owners.
It might be different if the location of business were not transfer, right? That's prohibited in state law and all code. So that's another, I guess, factor
right.
in terms of that whether someone could expect stay in one location.
Right.
So I guess that's the question. We have to think theoretically as economists. Will secondary market grow if we change code, say ownership of a license can be transferred? Right now,
I think we ended up fairly comfortable that it would not create that secondary market license. So is that, so are we good with that then? Have Dean get information and kind of learn about what the state's doing and try to bring us closer to that, allowing transfer of the licenses?
do I have like 6 months to do this?
It'd be complicated. I think we should think how long.
Yeah, it's till next week.
I would. Well, Dean, what would be reasonable? What would be reasonable?
Is August okay?
I would think.
Maybe
we're okay with that.
I have vacation.
Well, August is hunting season, Dean, so don't get too far into August.
Oh, well, maybe October.
He owes me some ordinances.
Okay, so we're going to transferable, get closer to state code. Any, Ryan or Dave, you have any issues? It's just not really a land use thing so much.
I just, Mr. Chairman, I just want to caution us that the state does not have all the good ideas.
Right.
So
That's clear.
we might, want to have a slightly different definitions or regulations than they have.
Well, that'll be a starting point. We'll get something in August and start beating around. So, that work? Okay. Thank you. So back on the agenda was, I'm not quite sure how to phrase it, but it's a 300 block. What's the block?
Let's just open for public comment and let them tell us what it is.
Okay, that's a good one. Okay, so I'd just like to open up then for public comment on bar break, I guess. And what I'd ask you to do, if you're going to speak, why don't you go ahead and sit up here. This little black box records our meeting, so you want to project to that for posterity. And so give your name and what I would ask is, and I think we had some email exchanges. And my view was, oh, it's a brown bag issue, brown bag's gone, issue's done. Now I understand there's some broader issues in the area that probably we need to learn about. So right, your name is?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My name is Russ Reno, and I own the property, I own a business known as Anchorage Downtown Tour Group at 527 West 3rd, directly across the street from the Hilton Hotel, and next door, locally speaking, to Brown Bag. I first want to say for this committee that, Mr. Chairman, you were more than gracious. Your email you sent me, you took responsibility for. There was some real stuff that happened that we got really confused here, and we're not communicated, and I really appreciate that. I give a lot of respect for you in your position and for this committee for owning up to that. Thank you. I just wanted to let you know that there is still an ongoing situation. I'm sorry I don't have more copies of it, with your permission. Okay. This is what we have today, not last week, not last month, not a year ago, today. This is how the property looks on both sides there. There's some other email stuff there, but not unrelated, or it is related, but it's kind of had to change things the last night, 2 o'clock in the morning. I found out what's going on. If anybody, there's been several people in this room that have worked with me, and to say that I can be passionate is probably the biggest understatement in this century, because I tend to say what I want, and sometimes I don't throttle myself back. But I really feel that we're being ignored on 3rd Avenue, that things are just getting shoved under the table, and it's not an issue no more, because we're not getting calls or complaints or anything else like that. Meanwhile, I have a tourist company that's right next door to this pig pen that I'm sitting next to, and I've got to try to bring tourists right past this to see all this stuff that's looking today like this, and it's no longer an issue. Well, for the economic development of 3rd Avenue, it's a huge issue. And I challenge this committee to look into the fact that it's been said that we're trying to keep a bar from going into that location as a group. Me personally, I'm not trying to get a bar to not go into that location. I'm trying to get a professional, reasonable business owner to take over a bar and restaurant, or however they see fit to do it, that respects the residents and the community downtown Anchorage, and doesn't do stuff like this and cause riots downtown and so on and so forth. We all know about it. I'm not going to go into all that stuff. I really want to stay on script here so I don't say anything wrong or off color here, but I personally have been attacked over this whole mess with the brown bag. Some of it has been validated by members of this assembly, and in writing and on the news, and I really take offense to that, because I think you should be there supporting the business that's still sitting there today, bringing in business in and adding to the economic development of downtown Anchorage. And for one of your assemblymen to attack me in writing and on local television stations and say that insinuate that I'm personally, and the reason why this stuff has happened downtown is I think at the very least uncalled for. And I've even asked for a reason why, and I still believe that the last thing I heard was that if it was them that I had attacked, that they would have probably called the cops and had me investigated for harassment. So with all that said, there is an issue downtown on 3rd Avenue, and I know that other people here have things to say, so I'll leave it at that unless you have any questions.
So your immediate issue with these pictures is that property is a bit of a mess.
It's been abandoned. They threw their beer kegs, they threw it into a big pile up there, and then called the strip and said, "Come get your stuff." They were like a maze that they would just throw all all the beer steins, their equipment, everything else was out in a big pile out in the middle of the yard.
So the property owner is probably the person who might clean that up.
I have no idea who's in charge of that property at this point. It has not been a sandwich company. I'd like to get some facts out there. It's not been a sandwich company for over 6 months. It opened for a couple of brief weeks throughout the winter. It's been nothing but a rowdy bar harassing downtown Anchorage. And we have had to live with this with riot lines and everything else downtown. And this is not a sandwich company like it's being portrayed, some little mom and pop store that got kicked out by the residents. It's been closed. They've lived in Seattle for the last 6 months.
Okay, but that's kind of done then. So we're looking at our current situation and future. Okay.
The way I see that it's not done is because tomorrow they could walk in there and reopen their business. We have no say-so on that. What is keeping them from opening that business? They may say they're not opening it, but there's still a liquor license in their name. There's still a business license in their name. There's still an operation. If they still choose to come up here and start this over again, they can do it tomorrow. What's stopping them? Unless I go, unless there's something someone else can tell me that I don't know about.
Chris, have you gotten a hold of the downtown partnership, or?
Mr. Swalling has engaged a foreclosure proceeding on the license to take the license back because he has an interest in it. And he owns the property, conditional use rights of the property, and his intent is to find an operator. And so it isn't to allow the McLeods back in. They're gone. That's really clear. And but I spoke with him 2 nights ago and asked him this very question: what's your plan? And he said he's initiated a foreclosure proceeding to claim back the license.
The mess he's talking about down there, has code enforcement looked at it all? That
You know, I have a dead body off of 5th Avenue at Juneau today, and homeless camps, and so this, while it's important, is only one of many priorities. And in fact, there was a major fire at a property on 12th and Juneau, 12th and Juneau this week. That is, in my opinion, the #1 worst code enforcement issue in the district at this time. an area where my energy is going, because people are living in a place where there's a whole 7,000 square foot dump with trailers and a burnt structure, and they're peeling off the blockades the fire department put on. So, you know, you can only focus on where the fires are brightest.
Just a question, I didn't see the handouts, so I can't speak to the location and or code enforcement. We're in response to it. Does anybody have?
Well, Mr. Chairman, I think we could probably drive around numerous parts of Anchorage and find garbage laying. I see garbage thrown out. I see people throwing fast food containers out their doors or driving down the street and things are splattering onto the path that I'm walking on. So there are irresponsible adults all over Alaska, unfortunately. And I've never seen a place where when the snow melts, there's just piles of garbage everywhere. I've always been amazed about that. And we address it by having a cleanup weekend or two, but and unfortunately in some areas you have to have a cleanup every day.
I'm sorry, Mr. Chairman, you said there was someone else that
Did you
speak?
Is that a good?
I will yield to
All right, yeah, appreciate it.
Good morning. Doug Ferris, I'm a neighbor of the previous brown bag occupants. And I'd like to first clarify, it's not just the bar break hours, it's midnight till 3 a.m. when they were in business. And Mr. Swalling, the landlord and owner of the building, came to a community council presentation a year and a half ago and gave a overglowingly review and defending brown bag tenants. So afterwards, I introduced myself to him, and I thought he must not be aware of what's going on. So I asked him, are you aware of what's going on at night, after hours? And I quote his response, "I don't care." He goes, "They pay their rent on time, and as far as I'm concerned, they're model tenants," unquote. And so I think the responsibility on any future bar that comes in falls back on the owner of the building and landlord. And if he has that type of attitude, I don't see where the next bar that comes in, if we're going to end up in the same situation. So,
Yeah, interesting point.
so there may be, and I'll leave this to your committee and assembly, if a conditional use permit, maybe restricting hours or something to hold him accountable.
I think we
Any
put
questions?
conditions on
Yeah.
liquor licenses, so that's definitely, liquor licenses proposed for that location, we do have the ability to put restrictions on it.
Yeah, and you have to take into consideration that there is a condo residential unit right next door and the Hilton Hotel right across the street. So it has a higher impact on the residents than maybe the bars on 4th Avenue, not being located directly next to it.
Is that raising your hand?
No.
To win the game? Bowling right come out or?
Bowling last night.
Oh, yeah. Maybe I should try it left-handed. I never
Mr.
tried
Ferris,
it. Yes.
other than, as you had just stated from the building owner, that comment concerns me greatly.
Yes.
Other than potential restrictions on hours, are there anything else from the community council's perspective or that you've heard discussed that might help mitigate any potential future liquor license at that location?
No, it seems like all the problems are at midnight to 3 a.m. So the most obvious solution might be restricting till midnight. But there may be other solutions that I'm not looking at that maybe you could propose.
I think Francis might have a couple ideas.
Yeah, I wanted, this is a great opportunity to
Yeah.
ask someone who has specialized knowledge of what's going on. What do you think about the outdoor deck? It could both be used as their smoking area, but is that creating the noise and problems? Because if there is no deck, then maybe they'll go out to the street, which is worse. Or
It's completely surrounding our building. Initially, it was just the front along 3rd Avenue and F Street. and another bar closed, and with that increasing number of people, they started taking over our parking lot in the back, so we were just surrounded all around. And the activities we were seeing, sex in our parking lot continuously, urination all
Yeah.
the time,
Yeah.
drug use, and then just loud partying, and that was going on all around. So just by eliminating the deck, I don't see that as
Mr. Chair, it seems to me that the operator was sort of tone deaf about being a good neighbor. I mean, that's clear. This is the downtown central business district, and so part of downtown you think about places like restaurants and bars and that, but the operation of this one was clearly creating problems. And you guys have some tools. I mean, so they have an existing alcohol license, and if that gets transferred to somebody else, then you'll be notified because it'll come before the assembly. Also, you can revisit the conditional use approval to place additional restrictions on that should it become necessary too.
Okay, well, that's good to know.
I'd like to hear from the community.
Yeah, we can, Dick, and then, Michelle, you want to speak?
Is that license currently being used in any way or manner? Then you said everything was there yesterday, last night?
That's the way it looks today.
Then where did it come from, do you know?
When they took everything out of the indoors, they just piled it up in a big pile, and people came and took what was theirs.
But there's no functioning license currently there of any kind?
I don't know that answer.
Construction site.
What's that?
It's a construction site. They're tearing it apart.
Okay, thank you.
Are you familiar with the question?
I see the permits on
Section west,
So it's a scare. So they are working on fixing it.
But it's not a construction site per se. They're taking out the remnants of the previous business and clearing the site so that it can be made available for some future use, which by necessity requires putting some materials outside. But I haven't gone by to see if it's reasonable or not. I don't know. These photos I can't see. I just can't tell. And so, but I do know because I spoke with Mr. Schwalling earlier this week, over the weekend, that the intent is to get the place back to order and restored so that it can be a functional commercial space.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It sounds like they're cleaning it up and getting ready to release it. I mean, if I owned the building and I was in that situation, that's what I'd be doing. I mean, he's paying taxes on that building. He's got to have some money coming in.
Michelle, do you have a community council comment? Can you sit up here and speak?
Sure. So I'm Michelle Gallagher for the Downtown Community Council. And so our April committee meeting for marijuana and alcohol, we had residents from the adjacent property come and talk to us. And we sort of, what our recommendation is that we bring it to this committee, this issue. And that specific issue seems to have dispersed a little bit, but I think that that's bringing up a larger issue with bars downtown being close to residents, as well as the bar break time. I know we have a representative here that's, from one of the establishments is part of the extra hour closing, and I think he has some comments on that. But I don't think that this specific issue around actions of people that were using this bar is going to go away. I think it's going to move somewhere else. And so this is just going to be a continual process. And I think the fact that the residents were so close to this bar, it became a louder issue because they're more affected by it than the businesses that close their doors and leave at night, where a lot of the bars are located next to. So that's a question.
Chris, Michelle, so you've heard of the new development at the transit center, like some 70 units of housing.
Yes, the
And
disclosure, the company I work for, that's
one of your
I work
projects.
for Memorial.
Right, so, but there are several other residential projects coming, and we also have bars and entertainment facilities operating in the downtown. So what do you think is coming?
I think it's going to probably highlight the issue with that 12 to 3 a.m. Bar culture, and I don't know the good solution for that.
think generally it's something that you accept when you come and live close to a downtown, that there's gonna be events and activities going on?
Any other city that I've been to, it's part of the downtown. You know it's going to be a nightlife on the weekends, and you know it's going to be loud. And I think that there's some design aspects that when you're building a building, you make it so that the windows are soundproof, and you don't have those issues. But I think a lot of the older buildings here, it's going to be. But that is the culture of most downtowns.
Thank you.
Well, thanks, Mr. Chairman. I spent the majority of my career in the hospitality industry, and that included businesses with beer and wine licenses and liquor licenses. And that midnight to 3 a.m., it can turn into a free-for-all depending on management. The bartenders are required to be trained to recognize when someone's had too much to drink. But it depends on the management whether they ever cut anybody off or not. And if you don't cut them off, once if they've been there for a couple hours, it actually picks up. Instead of drinking a couple of beers an hour, they might be drinking one every 15 minutes or whatever it is that they're drinking. And so it can get out of control. So it just depends on who's managing it and if they're trying to be reasonably responsible or not. And from what I've seen downtown, most of them are not reaching the point of responsibility, to put it that way.
So, I don't always think it's part of the sole issue with the bartenders or recognizing people are too drunk. A lot of times you buy a group of drinks and you go and give them to your friends, and the bartenders have no control on that. One of the things I think is serving alcohol all the way up till it closes is an issue. And you turn the lights on and everyone pounds their drinks and leaves. Or, if you have that extended hour, but you stop serving, you essentially close the bar down. If there was a way that you stopped serving but allowed people to finish their drinks in a reasonable manner without turning lights on and telling them to throw it out or, down it, that's sort of helping the problem. So I don't know if that's a potential solution.
Well, let me see. Want to chime in?
Mark Rickey from Gaslight. I'm here to observe. I'll let John Hattie speak for his own business.
I would like to speak to what Mr. Peterson said, though, that most bar owners aren't living up to their responsibility. I would push back on that. I would suggest in the downtown that most bar owners are actually doing a really good job. And it's an interesting climate we have, kind of lower participation because of the recession and other things. But I now go to the downtown often, so I live in the district, and my assessment is it's rare that a bar owner is flagrant and in violation of what we would call good management standards. So I just would push back on that. In this case, I would suggest the process was working. The entity would have been here today had they not made the decision to quit. And so we're doing our job, and the process needs to be allowed to work. It can't just be people shouting at each other, and not listening, shouting over each other. It has to be a process that's deliberative and fair and equal. But I would suggest that my knowledge of the bars downtown is they all want to have a good, clean operation because they don't want to deal with this. Right? And I don't know. I guess I just have to push back on that.
Just want to add something with the Gaslight. I was going to work out one weekend morning at 3 a.m. and the employees of the Gaslight were out there room sweeping their sidewalk after the bar closed. The brown bag did nothing like that. So,
please say.
Well, so did you want to add and chime in too?
Well, we sweep all the way from G Street to the end of our business, at the end of every night, just to clean up cigarette butts, hot dog wrappers, whatever's out there, we clean up. That's just every night thing.
Good, thank you. Did you want to speak to? You came to our meeting.
Oh, no, I'm marijuana.
Oh, I know.
But we're neighbors.
Okay. I know, but you have a
He sleeps for a sidewalk.
So thank him. Okay. Are you done? Okay.
So,
doors?
yeah, two comments. The first is I think it'll be interesting to see how the culture of downtown changes when there are 150 police officers there. It'll just be interesting to see, and I don't know if it'll make it better or worse. I hope it'll make it significantly better. But I actually also want to identify with what Mr. Constant said. I do think that most of the downtown bar owners are operating good businesses with good business practices. Last year, maybe it was a year and a half ago, I started exploring the idea of altering the bar break safety hour program a little bit so we could get higher participation. We have relatively low participation in that program, and doing things like allowing them to not turn the lights on for that hour, allowing people to finish their drinks, allowing them to keep the music on, little things to make it not feel like you have to immediately go, I think would help. Unfortunately, when I brought this up, Sylvia from the industry said, "Oh no, it's fine. We don't need to make any changes," which I thought was kind of odd. I'm not sure if maybe there's miscommunication there, but so I haven't gotten good feedback from the industry yet on what exactly would improve that program, except they want to. I have heard people like, "Well, we'll just extend our hours," and I'm not sure if that's really what we want to do, because when I first got on the body, I actually thought about doing just that, because maybe it would reduce the problems of bar break. So I had my aide at the time do a bunch of research, and there's actually statistical studies to show the longer you let the bars open, actually the more violent crime you have. It correlates pretty strongly. So that was unfortunate. But I do welcome anyone, and perhaps Mr. Constant, who wants to work with me on trying to improve the safety hour program so that it's a little more effective.
Okay, briefly?
Briefly, I just want to address what was just said here in the last 10 minutes. I agree with Mr. Constance. I think that most of the bars downtown are following a lot of the rules that have been set in place by the Assembly and by the residents of downtown Anchorage. And there are responsible bar owners that are doing this quite effectively. What we had over there next door to us was a group of individuals that have gone from one bar to the next systematically, causing this harassing mess. They're made up of drug dealers. They're made up of these hooligans that are running around causing all this havoc. And this crowd is what that bar attracted, because it had a young ownership base there that had no experience running the bar. They would close down exactly at 3 o'clock, shove everybody out in the street, and then turn all their lights off around the building, pitch black out there, and leave all these people standing in the streets, getting into fights, rioting, and everything else, and now we have to deal with it. That's the part we were dealing with. We were dealing with people that were not responsible bar owners, and I think the responsible person would have done something different and got some things done that we would all been happy about.
Okay, I think I've gathered that sense. So, the question here is, we discuss it, there's a lot of forums this can be discussed. I know you have a community council, you have the downtown partnership, you have the public safety. Is there some issue here we should be tackling, or is it just stay informed, and when we get new licenses and be alert to special conditions? How do we
Just
move
one
forward?
thing, John. If they're remodeling this for new business, and they should have a receptacle down there, take their trash and put a receptacle on out of there. A lot of companies have dumpsters you can get for remodeling to dump the trash in there and clean it out.
Again, I can't say that's what they're doing. That's just what he told me they were doing. So.
And Chris, could you check with code enforcement? Make sure there are regulations. If they're remodeling it, they shouldn't have a trash receptacle. Forget what's left out of there.
Sure. Through the chair, it's hard to tell from those photos, but it looks like the garbage, the picture depicted garbage that are actually on property. And so at that point, it just looks like litter. It's not actually construction activity, but I let them know.
Thank you.
Francis?
I just say that I agree with some of the things that were said. I think the operation is really important. So Rum Runners was a problem bar, and they were engaging in illegal activity and that sort of thing. But Hard Rock Cafe, I'm not aware that they are creating any disturbance or issues or problems. Right? Yeah, and it's the same building. It's just came down in operation with them.
But I'm sorry to interrupt, but what Chris just said is actually a relevant point. I've been to Hard Rock a few times. They don't do nearly the amount of business Rum Runners did. So, we also want to create a system where if you have a successful bar and a lot of people, that indicates that you are a poor operator. That's just not, that can't be the case. But Rum Runners was terrible, don't get me wrong.
Yeah, they're terrible.
You can't pistol whip people.
Downtown struggles because at 2 or 3 in the morning, they push out 500 people onto the street. And that's never going to be orderly.
Yeah.
Right. But that's how much they have capacity for, and their operation is orderly. And so they've asked for special consideration from the police to help them move bodies along because they need help, otherwise it does decay. And so there are, in some ways, a need for partnership between all of the entities that are working on these issues. Because even that's just a modestly successful place that serves 500 people on a given night on a Sunday or Saturday. And so, but that's going to, by its nature, have a conflict with people who are trying to sleep there.
Dean?
I was just going to mention that with respect to Brown Bag Sandwich Company, I had talked to Mandy Honest, and she said they weren't part of the bar break permit program because they had 2 different licenses. One was restaurant eating place license for the upstairs restaurant, and they can be open 24 hours, so I just had to stop serving beer or wine if it was the bar downstairs that had to close. So they didn't bother because people could stay at the restaurant upstairs. So I don't know if the bar break permit program would be helpful for an operator like that. So I'm just not sure if you are aware that they have that. Stay open. So they didn't have to push people out. People would stay open until 6 a.m. At least when they start.
Thank you. Francis?
Yeah, I mean, so JBER sends out observers to look out for their soldiers. STAR goes and looks for, women who may be intoxicated or abusive men or the criminal activity, people trolling to try and, kidnap people, that sort of thing. So there's some different things going on downtown. I think some of the bar owners would say that, they're not the cause of all of the problems because there's a group of people that will drink and drive around and then come into their business or maybe not, that they're sort of getting blamed for. So people will consume alcohol and then go into a business and not purchase any alcohol. But operations are really important. I was going to make another point, but I can't quite remember. Oh, yeah, it was Coots. So Coots is a good operator to speak to about this because when Coots closes, they experience a large number of people leaving, and some of those people, it's a free-for-all, right? So they have an army of security guards to overwhelm the situation and deal with it, and I think it's been very successful. I talked with I can't remember, it's not Devin, but Duran, yeah. And so I think that they have a long history of learning how to deal with bar break and to try and quell or quash those fights and noise and problems that occur afterwards. And they essentially have a whole army of security. So Mr. Constant said there needs to be a partnership, sure, but Coots has actually taken upon themselves to hire a whole bunch of security and to deal with the problem, and they, I think, have had some success with that. They sent a whole bunch of people to preemptively cut off those issues.
I would offer that I agree. The difference, of course, is that there's only one large operation on the whole Spenard right there. The Buckaroo is pretty de minimis, and in the downtown there are a whole bunch more. And all at once, all over the downtown, there is this process that occurs, and it heads in every direction. And I would say, to the credit of the operators, that as soon as Brown Bag closed, I received communication from several of them stating that they were coordinating to ensure that the element that was causing problems didn't just immediately uproot and land in another downtown bar. And so they were very on point and ready to go and dealing with the issue as it came. And so far, I haven't heard any robust explosion of new complaints from people because of trouble after 2 in the morning. So it seems to be that their coordination and their focus is working.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The first job I had when I came to Anchorage in 1981 was working at the Anchorage Times. And on weekends, they delivered their paper in the morning. So the first weekend I was ever pulling into the Anchorage Times about 5:30 in the morning, I was driving down 4th Avenue, and there were these large groups of men, mostly, standing out in front of bars that were closed. And there was one here and one there, and there were several hundred people. And so when I got to work, I asked the employees, what's going on with all the people standing out on 4th Avenue? And they're going, well, the bar's closed from 5 to 6. They're required to close for an hour a day. And so they're waiting for the bar to reopen. And so I was telling this story to our homeless coordinator, Nancy Burke, the other day, and she says, it was a de facto homeless shelter. And she was right. But going back to the point I made about irresponsible operators, I'll have to admit I don't go downtown to close the bars very often. I've actually been to Willow Walk for a couple musical events, and I was the designated driver, so it was a little bit of a different experience than being the partying crowd. But I'm glad to see that you think they are operating responsible, because we do have a little bit of a reputation of having an alcohol problem in the city. As a matter of fact, Bob Hope, when he was entertaining the troops years and years ago, the joke that he made about Anchorage was it had the largest bar in the world. It started on one end of town and ended on the other end. And unfortunately, it was probably close to true.
I would just like to thank the community council and the residents for coming, because you're absolutely in the right forum. Especially this committee, we take conditional use permits, and we take, we rarely do get into the weeds when it comes to using code to try to help the community, different parts of the community mitigate issues. There was a time where we had controversial liquor licenses, or certain liquor licenses would all go to the Public Safety Committee. With a change of experience, Mr. Honeman's no longer with us, and with a change of experience on the Assembly, I think this is the best committee to deal with these issues, because you have a firm grasp of land use issues and licensing and permitting here on this committee. And so I can't, though we're not going to take any official action yet, brown bag closed and all that, I don't want you to think it's a waste of time. I think you guys have hit on the mother lode when it comes to proactive mitigation to make sure this doesn't happen again in your community when it comes to where you connected. So I just want to say that, because I know sometimes when you hear us talk, you're like, "Oh, they didn't do anything," but I can guarantee when this issue comes back in front of us, there's some that never go away, and there's others that just have really are really dialed into details in their community. And so I just want you to know you made a great connection here, and I think you were heard by everybody. And we take the issue very seriously, so thank you for coming.
Yeah, thank you for that. Okay, anything else on this? Okay, just one more thing, very briefly, and I thank the planning department. I think Chris Schutte as well, but something that I think anyone involved with community councils in Anchorage, we have our blue signs for public hearing notice, and it has hieroglyphics here, and you're supposed to make some sense out of it, you know what it is. But pretty much what you're clear is, I don't even want to know if you even notice it. So that has been something I've been frustrated with. And I started at an aid last summer. We were shopping around and doing some research, went to community councils and say, how are these signs working for you? Kind of the normal blue ones we all know. And no one liked them. And we were getting some feedback on what would work. And then kind of stalled a bit, but the planning department picked it up. I think Chris and I don't know, Dave or whoever, and came up with some signs. So I will debut these at the Huffman Valley Community Council. We'll shop around. Actually, the young woman who helped me last summer is back in town, and I think we'll show them. But these say much more clearly what we know. We know when we put these signs up what it's for.
It's not just a case number.
Not just a case number. We'll say what it is. You have room for that. And then as we get used to it, it says here, okay, subdivision. That gets my attention, okay?
Oh, I like
So people
it.
start to learn. And this is marijuana. Instead of just the blue sign saying land use action, marijuana. That's a whole big different issue for people.
You've done it in green.
Very timely here. Alcohol, right? If there's, and in my view, let's get these issues out. The sooner the better, and not late when people are worried or it's too late to do anything. And zoning, is it a minor variance or is it a rezone to allow a huge building next to you? Right. So these are much more clear. They'll have more information, a clear, not a generic phone number, but a phone number for the person in charge, case type. So much more information. And so anyway, thank you to everyone who's doing
That's
this.
a great idea.
Amy Atkins, by the way, Amy Atkins, who was in my transportation planning division.
So do we need one with a T on it?
T. We're going to have a whole
For
array
traffic.
for every zoning action.
Chris, could you bring this to Federation meeting?
We plan on it.
Please.
Well, I would like my own little packet too. When my assemblies committee
I'll
starts.
give you one right now.
Would you, oh, that'd be wonderful.
I got that.
Yeah, that'd be wonderful, because I think for every one of us that attend a community, because these are some of the biggest issues we keep hearing.
Actually, I'd like to get today's normal blue one too, kind of hold up as a counterpoint. You know,
Yeah,
we
that's
should
a
get
good
that
idea.
too, so.
On your first sign, the yellow one, from a distance, you can't see the lettering underneath your S. All the other ones you can see from a subdivision.
Right.
You don't see the distance.
Well, they're prototypes.
They are
so can shop
prototypes, yes.
around, so appreciate that.
There's in black.
Orange might be better than
The
yellow.
idea, if I can just kind of bring your attention to the idea of the sign. One is the large letter that kind of gives you an idea of what the entitlement actually might be, along with the associated color. So it's a great point, and we'll probably end up making that change. But the idea was to put the public on notice of, one, the color, which associates that color with an action, and then two, the letter, which again is associated with different actions.
Okay, good, thanks.
Yeah, one of the biggest complaints we continually get from citizens is, nobody told me. I didn't find out about this till last night. You know, it's too late. And so this might help a little.
Okay, anything else? All right, thank you, everybody.